The 14th year of Chenghua. Chapter 47. Seeing a ghost. Paying respects during New Year's celebrations was a given. At dawn of the first day of the year, Tang Fan went with Sui Zhou to the Sui residence to pay respects to Sui Zhou's parents, ending it with a trip to the neighboring Zhou residence to pay respects to old Madame Zhou. Her son had returned to the capital, making her house lively. Just like most elderly, the madam loved to watch the excitement of her descendants filling the halls. She also had repeated praises for Tang Fan, a young man she had met already, and introduced him to the family of Sui Zhou's uncle. Once they went out of the Zhou residence, Dong was giddy from having collected a good many packets of New Year's money. "Which house are we going to pay respects to next?" she asked Tang Fan, greedily rubbing her hands. He side-eyed her. "Which one do you want to get your money from?" Her thoughts had been pierced right through, but she wasn't ashamed as she stuck out her tongue. "Right. It'd be best to gather them up until my hands go soft." Tang Fan bopped her without mercy. "Don't even think about it. I only have one sister in Xianghe, which would be inconvenient to visit during New Year, and no other relatives in the capital, so you'll be going home and obediently eat dumplings. Besides, how much did you get? Is it any different from what I haven't yet given?" "It is," she giggled. "What you give is yours and what I collect is mine." "Okay, you little brat. My affection for you has been in vain." He knew that she wasn't actually thinking like that, he just enjoyed bickering senselessly with her. Dong was in charge of money normally, and after she had learned writing characters and bookkeeping, her each and every brush stroke was above board. Just as she had claimed, after she became the family's steward, she had saved a bit from Tang Fan's pitifully meager salary every month in preparation for when he took a wife in the future. He was also intending to set aside a bit of a dowry for her, of course. Everyone was giving the same kind regards to each other, so there was no need to divide things up so decisively, else they wouldn't be family. Following that, he took Dong with him to visit the Pan estate. He had been about to pay respects to Pan Bin, but when they reached there, he was informed that the man was out paying respects to his own superiors, so he just skipped this step and went home. These days, apart from the person's most important superior that would require a personal visit during the New Year, it had become popular to just send New Year greeting cards between friends and colleagues. A person definitely had numerous acquaintances, and that would be too many houses to go to, and should one pay respect to this person but did not go to that person might get offended. Should one attempted to pay respect to everyone, then he won't probably finish doing so even by day 15. Simply dispatching servants with greeting cards to those houses, with your name and a few words of blessings written within, would therefore be considered the utmost of courtesy. There were also many that didn't send anything at all, like Tang Fan. He had no servants at home, meaning that he would have to run around himself, but if that running was going to break his legs, he might as well just not. After the Lantern Festival, everyone would be set up for an appointment for a meal at a restaurant anyways, and then all would be fine. For that reason, people like him loved celebrating New Year the most. His current official's position was low, so he was not obligated to observe many convoluted social niceties. He also didn't hold a lucrative job in any sort of important bureau, so no one would bother to send him any New Year celebration gift. This all saved him a lot of trouble. From the second day to the 5th, he lazed around all day, from morning until after the noon, where Dong would stand by his bed and tug his ear to get him out of it. Yet, after those 6 days, his life wasn't so great anymore. From the 6th to the 10th of January, he had to confront a heap of complex official duties in the bureau. The way this vacation was set up wasn't very rational. Just imagine, it ended on the 5th, after which it would start back up on 11th again, having 5 days of work in the middle. Nobody had yet recovered from the comfort of the New Year vacation, and everyone had started to look forward to the Lantern Festival vacation time, so they obviously didn't have much urge to do work. There generally was never anything new and big that would happen on these past couple of days, mostly just old cases that amassed with dust in the Shuntian prefecture that couldn't be fully handled in 1 second, nor be hurriedly dealt with properly in just a few days. Tang Fan had always worked in a methodical manner. He had Du Zhang arrange things in accordance to order of importance so he would know which one to work on first and which one could be put off for later. Just like this, the Lantern Festival break on the 11th soon came. Dong was the happiest. The most ceremonious festival of the year was the winter solstice, while the most important festival was the New Year, but the festival regarded as the most exciting was the Lantern Festival. The lantern market that showed up each time was well known. The whole street would be hung with multicolored lanterns, layers and layers of them, all with different looks. Trees of fire, flowers of silver, bridges of stars, and locks of iron. It was an extremely spectacular sight. Only on this day of the year would everyone go out to sightsee, regardless of whether they were an unmarried daughter that never left the gates of their residence, or a married woman that strictly abide by wifely virtues. This was tantamount to the entire city setting into motion, infinite people vacating its alleyways. It was little wonder that she was so excited. It began exactly at the start of the officials' vacation. The market was actually autonomously launched by the capital's Chamber of Commerce, since they could take advantage of the Lantern Festival period to do a bit more business. Once the crowd got really too much, however, public security would inevitably get chaotic and the authorities would have to be dispatched to take responsibility of patrolling during the festival. But who would want to go do work while other people played on such a big holiday? When the lantern market was first set up in the Great Ming, the Shuntian prefecture, the 5 districts' military office and even the departments like the Chenghua had all shirked that responsibility, unwilling to take the job. Later on, a fatal stampede incident occurred and only then did the cabinet order that each bureau was to have some people patrolling this time of year, with the main responsible division rotated annually, thus forming a routine of lasting effect. This year, the 5 districts' military office was in charge of the patrolling duty. Shuntian Prefecture and the Chenghua only had to dispatch a small number of manpower to assist. Sui Zhou happened to be the one in charge of the group from the Chenghua. He had been promoted again not too long ago for his handling of Huang Jinglong's case and was now a deputy Chenghua. Upon one man's achievement of the Dao, the animals around him would also ascend to the heavens. He didn't feel much about it, but his subordinates were ecstatic, believing that they were following an immediate superior with bright future prospects. Sui Zhou wasn't fond of talking, but that didn't mean that he was ignorant to the ways of the world. Prior to the holidays, he treated his group of subordinates to dinner and wine in celebration of his promotion. However, because he had to help in patrolling and keeping the peace this day, he couldn't go with Tang Fan and Dong for a stroll. Tang Fan brought Dong out to view the lanterns, the bustling crowd nearly wedging them apart. Being young, she hadn't seen much of the world and was quite delighted to see the excitement, so he firmly led her along by the hand, afraid that they would get separated. From time immemorial until now, many human traffickers had been amongst the populace, and they particularly liked to go for beautiful, cute, and pleasant women and children. No matter how celebrated one's origins were, once they fell into human traffickers' hands, they could only be resigned to their fates. Before the Song Dynasty, there had been tragic cases of imperial kin and nobility getting kidnapped. The Ming Dynasty had none of those so far, but many still went missing every year. Some were sold into brothels, some as slaves. Their perfectly good lives would be ruined, their fates utterly miserable. A plump little girl like Dong would be a prime target for these human traffickers. They toured the market for a while and also guessed at lantern riddles. Tang Fan guessed so many of them right in a row that the vendor's face got darker and darker, who after some time, realized that the situation was no good and thus made himself scarce. Dong had since been covered in the spoils received. She was holding a flower lantern, had a bracelet on one hand, a silk flower on her head and other knickknacks stuffed into her arms. It was no surprise that the vendor's face had gotten so unsightly. If Tang Fan had been allowed to keep winning, he probably would have had to give him all his family's property. Tired from their walk, they prepared to find a place to sit to rest for a bit and get a bite to eat while they were at it. By coincidence, the wonton stall that Tang Fan often went to was still open today. The owners looked to be giving their all to earn a tidy sum of money during this festive holiday, as they were terribly busy. Still, as a regular customer, an extra table could always be made up for him. The proprietress complimented Dong a bit, then served them up 2 bowls of wontons and 2 yubbing. Gag, let's go back and guess more riddles later. Dong, having just witnessed other people rack their brains while Tang Fan had guessed correctly one after the other, was self-assured and honored, her face full of pride. Go back. He smiled bitterly. Did you not see that vendor looking like he was about to swallow me whole? How about you leave a path of survival for other people? We'll find another stall, then. It's not just him doing them anyways. I heard that there's lantern appreciating activities in Xianqi restaurant, too. Really? We'll take a look later. Right after he had lowered his head to drink some broth, he casually lifted the bowl when he unexpectedly caught sight of someone walking past in front of him not too far away. The half-mouthful he had still nearly sprayed all out, only to overflow into his nose, making him cough until his insides ruptured. Dong quickly pat him on the back, admonishing him like he was an old decrepit. How old are you to choke after you eat something? There was no time for him to laugh, as his mind was still reeling from the shock it received. Gods above! Did he just see a ghost? Following that sudden event, he absent-mindedly ate a wonton. Because Dong was with him, he couldn't cast her aside to go give chase for a clearer look. Besides, the other had quickly disappeared into the crowd after just one hurried glance. If he hadn't been certain that his own eyesight wasn't tricking him, he would have believed that he had just hallucinated. Once Dong had finished her wontons, they walked in the direction of Xianqi restaurant. There were lots of people on the main road, so Tang Fan just took a smaller alley to avoid the congestion. The route was a bit longer, but with how clear the way was, it was actually a little faster if you think about it. Perhaps everyone that lived down these alleys had gone out to see the lanterns, or no one else liked to take the long road like he did, because when they turned into the alley, it was very quiet. It was like a completely different world from the outside excitement. Dong, who was typically carefree, now got a bit apprehensive. Before Tang Fan could tell her to, she firmly held his hand on her own. Gag. Huh. The little lady was hesitant to speak. It's so dark here. Are there any ghosts? He burst out laughing. How is it dark? There's a main road at the end of the alley. Is the way ahead not lit? Before he could say the word up, he suddenly got slapped on the shoulder from behind. Despite his mind knowing that it couldn't be a ghost, he couldn't help but make a huge jump in fright. As if sensing his full body jolt, Dong subconsciously looked behind them in turn. Yikes! A ghost, she shrieked in terror. Tang Fan quickly turned to look, as well. All he saw was someone standing very close behind him, their eyes staring sullenly at them. At first glance, this genuinely could make the hairs all over someone's body stand on end. However, Master Tang was a Confucian scholar, and believed in not speaking about the supernatural. His scare had purely been due to the suddenness of what happened, which he very quickly got over with. Gripping Dong's hand, he drew back a couple of steps with quick speed, then peered at the person who surprised him, who did not seem to have the inclination to step forward and attack again. Focusing his eyes, his heart then gradually settled into its original spot. I say, Eunuch Wang, what play are you putting on? Even if you don't find me pleasing to look at, there's no need to scare me to death, you know, he said angrily. Anybody else that had gotten smacked on the shoulder in a small alley late at night likely wouldn't be happy, either. Come with me. Wang Zhi's voice was muffled and a bit hushed, different from usual. It was like he was deliberately lowering his voice to conceal his identity. Saying as much, he turned around and walked forward. Tang Fan didn't have time to think more on this, obliged to hurriedly keep up with Dong in tow. As the head of an operative spy agency, Wang Zhi had long known the internal and external capital roads of every size like the back of his hand. He was definitely more familiar with them than Tang Fan was. He took them for a lot of loops, going from a small road to a main road, then turning from a main road to a small road, deliberately choosing the farthest route. Tang Fan very nearly fainted from all the spinning around before they finally reached their destination, which happened to be the back of Xianqi restaurant, where Tang Fan had just said he was going to bring Dong to. However, Wang Zhi did not go into Xianqi restaurant but to Xianjun restaurant right behind it, and to a single private room that was familiar. He didn't even need anyone to guide him to it. Tang Fan surmised that the room was one that Wang Zhi had reserved all year round, so that he could conveniently conduct private business anytime like he was doing now. Of course, he wasn't sure at all what Wang Zhi was wanting to conduct. Once inside the room, Eunuch Wang pulled off the hood of his cloak, undid the tie around his neck, then cast it to the side, showing a look of being relieved from a burden. He let out a very long sigh. That thing's really fucking stuffy. Tang Fan silently watched him. What are you staring at me for? If I'm recalling correctly, shouldn't you be in Datong right now? Yes, but I came back on secret orders from His Majesty. In addition to my confidants, only you two know about it now, as well. If my whereabouts get leaked, it'll definitely have something to do with you. Tang Fan rolled his eyes. I'm really being more wrong than Doi. With how you've wandered about a large street, under public view, it would be no surprise if someone recognized you. Wang Zhi hated. You act, I think. I'm on 4. Tang Fan quickly stopped him. Since you've come back under orders, I won't hear of them. The more secrets one knows, the quicker they'll die. Too late, you have to. Wang Zhi just did not care at all. There recently came a royal report claiming that suspicious figures had apparently been spotted on Longevity Mountain. After they investigated for a long time and found nothing, His Majesty summoned me, so I hurried back in order to arrange people to investigate it for these past few days. But then, another big thing happened. When it rains, it really pours. Such bad luck. He then waited for a long time, but didn't hear anything from Tang Fan. Why aren't you asking me what happened? I don't want to know anything, but from what you've said, even if I don't ask, you'll say it anyways, Tang Fan answered helplessly. Zhu Yang's youngest daughter and assistant minister Geng's grandson went missing together. The other let out an ah and then asked, when? Tonight. I just now learned of it. I've yet to have time to report to His Majesty, but even if he knew, we would probably just get told to find them, and find them fast. Zhu Yang is now deputy commander of the Northern Expedition, and is fighting on the front lines. Since he had this daughter in his middle age, he cherishes her like a treasure. I'm afraid that if he learned of this, his mind would stray from fighting and he would hurry back to look for her. Tang Fan nodded, indicating that he understood. At every festival, the time when all the families of the capital poured out of everywhere was also often the time when the count of missing persons cases increased dramatically. Traffickers frequently surveyed these opportune times to set to task, as the more people around there were, the more difficult the issue of retrieving them would be. Because the nightly curfew was rescinded these days, once the traffickers were out of the city, it would be like fishing a needle off of the seafloor. Having said that, even if they didn't leave the city, the entirety of Beijing was a huge area. Even if the whole of the Jinyue and the Western Depot was immediately dispatched, it would still not guarantee that every nook would get searched. Many children had been eternally separated from their relatives like that. Now though, the human traffickers' hands had placed themselves upon the children of officials. How could that be tolerated? If they couldn't be found and then word of that spread out, wouldn't departments like the depots and Jinyue get mudded? They would then become nothing more than pretty flower arrangements, and they might as well have gone back home to suckle their mother's teats instead of working for those salaries every year. The emperor would also become doubtful from this. Of course, you lot can't even find one person, so how could you do anything grander for me? For that reason, regardless of whether it was publicly or privately, Wang Zhi had to keep an eye on this. He had just been wandering the streets for the sake of personally finding traces of the human traffickers, and had also long seamlessly planted wardens about, mixing in with the crowd and pretending to be ordinary citizens. As soon as they discover any indication of child abduction, they would immediately chase after it, follow the vine back to its source and catch everything in one fell swoop. That had been a fine plan. What a shame that Chief Eunuch Wang and his subordinates had wandered for half a Shishan, yet no sort of commotion had occurred. It was obvious that these human traffickers were very vigilant. If they weren't certain that they could snatch someone, they wouldn't rashly go for it. If you need the Shuntian prefecture's aid, do give the command, Eunuch Wang, Tang Fan said. Wang Zhi curled his lip. No need. The Chenghua and the Eastern Depot have also been dispatched. Is your prefecture the one that's going to come out on top? Tang Fan had asked merely as a gesture of goodwill to begin with. Since he didn't need them, he wouldn't court disdain, instead asking after something else he was more concerned about. What's happened with the war on the front lines? The other's expression loosened up some. Wang Yu and Zhu Yang are both learned in military matters. There's no need to worry too much with them over there. After half a month more, they'll definitely have victory. Tang Fan relaxed as well. That's good. With the victory reported, the Tartars won't dare to invade lightly for a short amount of time. The border should finally get a little bit of peace. Wang Zhi scoffed. How boring. The mountain won't come to me, so can't I come to the mountain? This is a hard-to-come-by opportunity. We ought to press in with the win, striking for an even bigger victory. The Tartars are experts at guerrilla warfare and have a fierce cavalry. Please be careful, Eunuch Wang, Tang Fan reminded. Also, the court might dissent. I have my ways. Having touched upon the subject, Tang Fan said no more, letting it be. Wang Zhi pulled on the bell, and dishes came in succession. The workers at Xianyun restaurant had seen many occasions that could never be spoken of aloud. Upon seeing Wang Zhi, who should have currently been on the front lines instead of here, they averted their eyes, played mute and took him for transparent smoke. They set the dishes down, then left. They never stayed for long and acted like Tang Fan and Adong didn't exist, either. You should be careful, Tang Fan had to say. Since you don't wish for your whereabouts to be exposed, it would be best for you to return earlier. The workers here are also strangers. Wang Zhi gave him a weird grin, then suddenly asked him a weird question. You ate at Xianqi restaurant last month on the 6th, right? Tang Fan was startled. A chill ran all over his body. He wanted to ask him if he had planted someone to monitor him, but after thinking a bit deeper about it, a different question came out. You own Xianqi restaurant? Sure enough, Wang Zhi smiled gently. You deserve to be you. Yes, the Western Depot is one of the owners of this restaurant. One of? Tang Fan raised a brow. This business had originally been under the Zhejiang Commerce Committee. Later on, the Western Depot put some money into it, too. Guests crowd like clouds here, so it's the best for scouting out information. Tang Fan wasn't sure why he wanted to inform him of this, only wanting to laugh bitterly after hearing about it. I'm too afraid to come here to eat next time, lest you know even how many times I go to the latrine. I've never done anything shameful all my life, so I'm not afraid of ghosts knocking on my door at midnight. Stop, then. If I flirted with a song girl here, and then she ended up being your depot's spy, wouldn't I never be able to get away from that? Wang Zhi sneered. You think about such unpromising things all day long, eh? No wonder your official's post hasn't gone up till now. That I was able to attain 6th rank at my age is already pretty good. Who can be like you, not crowned yet but already in charge of the Western Depot? Moreover, now you have extra military power? People as powerful as you are few, under this sky. Wang Zhi used to be someone that liked to hear others praise him, but instead of looking pleased after hearing Tang Fan's set of pretty words, he sighed. The latter was a little confused, but the former didn't explain, so he didn't ask much. He kind of had to go right then, so he excused himself and left. By the time he returned to the table, he discovered that Dong, who had been obediently sitting and eating in the private room, had disappeared. Wang Zhi was still sitting there though, eating and drinking as calmly as ever. "Where's Dong?" Tang Fan quickly asked. "I had her do something." Wang Zhi delivered the food to his mouth, then set down his chopsticks. Afterwards, he picked up the damp, warm towelette that had just been brought over to wipe his mouth. The other frowned. "She's just a little girl. What could she do to help you? Don't joke around, Eunuch Wang. Please tell me where she went, and I'll go find her." "Why would I joke with you? Those human traffickers' tracks are well hidden, and they're mixed into the crowd, making them difficult to distinguish. The best way to go is deeper into the tiger's den. That little girl is clever and obedient. As soon as I asked her to be bait, she agreed to it. Once this case is solved, I'll definitely mark down a great merit for you." Upon hearing this, Tang Fan was endlessly furious but managed to barely suppress it. "Dong is my little sister, not anyone's bait." Wang Zhi remained calm. "Don't you worry. I'm having her walk about randomly in the crowd, pretending to be a child that's lost her elders. If nothing goes wrong, the human traffickers are certain to go after her. The depot has eyes and ears everywhere, and I've also had people tail after her. Once they make any moves, we can take over at any time, follow the trail, then dig up their hideout." Seeing Tang Fan's suppressed anger, he laughed aloud. "Your sister is more sensible than you. I told her that once this was done, you could get promoted, and she agreed to it immediately. She's pretty good to you. I heard that you're not blood siblings." Tang Fan was both enraged and distressed, not in the mood to exchange even half a sentence more with him. He threw out an "I'm going to look for her," then got up and walked out. "Stop!" Wang Zhi bellowed. "She won't be in any danger. Don't alert the enemy." "She isn't my sister by blood, but I love her like one," Tang Fan answered coldly. "Imagine, if you will, that your little sister's been used as bait and captured by human traffickers, and I tell you not to worry. Would you still be so understanding?" Wang Zhi raised a brow. "I don't have a little sister, so I can't answer that, but I've already said that Western Depot people are following her. Nothing will happen to her." "How can you know that nothing will happen to her? There's a big difference between she won't die and she won't be missing limbs." The other didn't answer, because he couldn't guarantee that, of course. Tang Fan, as a Shuntian prefect, had seen many cases of women and children getting kidnapped and sold. Those lucky enough to be found and returned, if they hadn't lost their purity, had been sold as slaves or into brothels, where a beating would be inevitable no matter what. To be brief, people who had recently fallen into a nest of demons would have to be trained first, which would go on until they were docile and too afraid to resist. All sorts of unknowable torture methods used during that juncture. Since Dong was so young, her ability to act was likely not any kind of strong, and her odds of getting found out were high. Furthermore, there would be an abundance of fugitives amongst those human traffickers. If someone like that found out that she was an inside agent, her life might be in danger. If she were stabbed, what would be the use of any officials catching up to her? Right then, a depot warden came into the private room, face unsightly. "Chief Eunuch Wang, we lost her." End chapter. The 14th year of Chenghua. Chapter 48. Insider Information. Upon hearing that, Wang Zhi lost his calmness. He stood up with a bang. What happened? We followed her all the way to the front of Dufukan Lane. A fight happened to break out at the doorway of a nearby shop, and the commoners circling around to watch the commotion suddenly distanced us from her. By the time we had caught up, she was completely gone, the subordinate said, ashamed. Slackers. Deadbeats. What do I keep you around for? Why aren't you giving chase? Wang Zhi roundly scolded. Just great. Zhu Yang's daughter and assistant minister Geng's grandson still hadn't been found yet, and now Prefect Tang's little sister had been added into the mix. Wait. Tang Fan said to the warden. Can you still locate the people who were fighting? Yes. We're in the area. Then I'll trouble you all to bring them back for interrogation. In case that the fight hadn't been coincidental, it might be a clue. The warden didn't answer and instead looked at Wang Zhi, which was normal. He was their superior, not Tang Fan. Why would they listen to a stranger's orders? The illustrious Western Depot had now had a moment of negligence, taking a huge tumble. This was what they called fighting a goose all day long, only for it to peck your eyes blind. Wang Zhi's expression was ugly, but Tang Fan's was even more unsightly. Wang Zhi's prestige had suffered damage, and he no longer had the face to speak persuasively to Tang Fan. Tang Fan had anxiety attacking his heart and didn't care to talk more to Wang Zhi. He quickly left Xianyuan restaurant. There was a sea of people outside. Now how could the little figure of Dong be found? He was not about to go find her himself, however, but would go right to the 5 districts military office. As the one in charge of the Chenghua that had been dispatched to help with the 5 districts patrol, Sui Zhou didn't need to set out in person. Instead, he was sitting in the 5 districts bureau, so that if his subordinates came across anything, they could find him easily. This was not a time for him to lead troops out. Tang Fan knew as much and thus had found him quickly. After hurriedly greeting everyone else, he explained what had happened to Sui Zhou. The instant the man heard about Dong being used as bait, his expression immediately tensed. He, too, had heard about the other 2 children getting kidnapped an instant before Tang Fan had arrived, but since the matter wasn't his responsibility, he had remained within the bureau. Now that Dong had been mentioned, he had to move. How long ago was this? I came directly from Xianyuan restaurant, so about half a shishan ago, Tang Fan answered. Sui Zhou gave a slight nod. Once he explained this to the others, he brought Xueling's group with him to go out. Where are we going now? Tang Fan asked. When it came to finding people, the Chenghua was more seasoned than he. We'll go up on the gate towers, first. Tang Fan's eyes shone. From the vantage point of the towers, the scope of view would be farther and even clearer. It would be much easier to spot any odd activities below. Their group took a shortcut down a small path, hurrying to the roofs. Yongding Gate's tower faced the middle of the capital's main road. The short buildings around weren't enough to block one's line of sight, and even some surrounding streets could be seen clearly. Starting from tonight, the entire city would be awake until daybreak for the imminently arriving Lantern Festival, the biggest holiday of the year, and the festivities would go until the day after its conclusion. Beneath the dual illumination of the bright moonlight and shining lanterns, there were activities on and off the streets, and heads near other heads in a grand stretch of black. Cheering and laughter came from below from time to time, brimming with jubilation. Citizens from outer counties would also use the festival period to come to the capital and make merry, making the head count of the common haunts far exceed the level it was normally. People could be seen wherever one looked. However, underneath this flourishing spectacle of peaceful song and dance was hidden a dark undercurrent. On days like this, whole families would head out, which was exactly the time that housebreaking robbers, stuff-stealing thieves, pickpockets and human-selling traffickers liked the most. Following each yearly festival, there would always be a rapid increase in cases reported to the various bureaus, both in ancient and modern times. Dong was a little girl that had long been submerged within multitudes of people. At a glance, there was nothing but tall and short heads. Even with an all-seeing eye, she would probably be hard to find. Tang Fan knew that anxiety was useless at this point, so he calmed himself down, then joined Suizhou and the rest in observing what was below. Upon climbing high, many details that had been hard to see before immediately showed up. Within the crowd, many men flirted with their young wives, women disguised as men were out to play, and people argued with their companions over lantern riddles. They were distant, their words unable to be heard, yet quickly figured out by looking from a high spot. Suizhou's group split up into several spots of observation. After watching for a little under half a shishan, when everyone was feeling their necks getting sore and stiff, Xueling was heard to yell, "Brother, look over there." Everyone turned to where he was pointing. A 4-year-old child was standing in front of a shop, sucking on his finger as he eagerly stared at a peddler selling tanghulu not far from him. The peddler motioned to him and he walked over. The elder that he had been with was selecting stuff from a store or something, as they didn't even notice. Right when the child was about 3 steps away from the peddler, someone suddenly scuttled out from the side, holding a stick of tanghulu out for the child as he led him away by his hand. The kid, drawn in by the candy, was quickly taken away. The peddler watched the scenario unfold yet said nothing. Presumably, he was in the same group as the human trafficker, and was just selling the tanghulu to cover for his comrades over there. Looking at everyone in the surrounding, it was as clamorous and unusually lively as ever. They were all focused on the other things around them and nobody had lowered their heads to pay attention to the whereabouts of one child. Had their own group not witnessed this event, there would have been another missing child case in the capital tomorrow. Suizhou gave an order and Xueling quickly brought 4 Jinyue down the tower to run towards the area the child had been abducted to. The so-called above and underworlds each had their respective ways. The livelihood of kidnapping could not be done by one group of people, meaning that there were definitely means of mutual contact between the various groups, like the one they had just seen take the child. He might not be of the same group that had kidnapped Zhu Yang's daughter or Dong, but catching one made it a lot easier to flush out other clues. On Xueling's end, the kidnapper and the peddler had both been captured. On another end, the child's family had just realized that he was missing and were currently running around in a panic. Upon seeing that he had been found, they shed tears of infinite gratitude. Saying no idle banter, Xueling's group brought the 2 kidnappers to Suizhou. People like this were used to shady activities, their conscience long darkened through and through. They denied everything in every way they could, pledging oaths to the heavens. The peddler claimed that he was merely doing legitimate business, content with his lot, while the child taker claimed that he had seen the child be alone for a time, then thought to take him to find his parents, lest he get kidnapped. In short, they both cried about being falsely accused. Suizhou didn't argue with them. "Which group do you 2 belong to? Boss Lai, Luz Hilly, or Ding Yumuo?" he asked coldly. The 2 blinked. "What are you talking about, sir?" one said. "It doesn't make sense to us." "It's true, sir," said the other. "We really are normal, peaceful civilians. Intelligence agencies like the Jinyue or the depots had unaccountable connections to the underworld, despite being government agencies on the surface. In order to avoid conflict happening with government agents, some people would put in more bribes. As long as they didn't cause too much trouble, the authorities would have one eye open, one eye closed about them. Yet, under current circumstances, this trouble they had caused was a bit too much. Suizhou, of course, would never let it slide, but even if it was somebody else, they would have to do their jobs all the same. Seeing as the 2 of them refused to admit anything unto pain of death, he turned to Xueling. "Take them back to the imperial prison. You know what you should do." Xueling nodded, laughing evilly at them. "I guarantee that I'll make them regret ever being born." Once they heard the word imperial prison, their souls were scared out of their bodies. I confess, one quickly shouted. I'm a subordinate of Boss Lai. Right as he said that, a mild voice resounded from not far off. Don't believe him. He's one of Ding Yumu's. Accompanying the voice was Wang Zhi, who was walking on over. He looked at the man, snorting in amusement. How intolerable. You've already gotten captured yet you still dare to lie. You really won't start crying until you see your own coffin, huh? He then turned to Sui Zhou and Tang Fan. Regardless of whether it's Luz Hilly or Boss Lai, I've already invited them as guests into the Western Depot. They haven't captured any young children tonight, meaning that this should be the work of Ding Yumu's henchmen from the South Side gang. As it was, there were especially many wealthy people in this prosperous capital. Each and every child raised within those residences was pampered, making them leagues different from ordinary commoners that fled from disaster and sold themselves as servants. They were the favorite target of traffickers, among which were two gangs that specialized in selling people for a living in the underworld. The aliases of their separate leaders were Boss Lai and Luz Hilly. Apart from human trafficking, the gangs did other business, too, such as privately selling salt, weapons, tea, and so on. That was the main source of their income, because how could they ever be able to sell enough people? Their brotherhood would have long starved to death. Boss Lai and Luz Hilly had been hiding out in the city for many years. They couldn't represent all of the capital's underworld power, but there really weren't many groups that practiced human trafficking. There had only been 3 groups for a long time now. These 2 gangs were local tyrants and they knew who they could and could not provoke. They would absolutely never do something so disaster-courting as kidnapping the family of officials. At most, they would act against the children of merchants, maybe leaving a message behind for their family following the abduction, extorting a large sum of money from them, then putting them back where they got them. In addition to them was the South Side gang, whose leader was Ding Yumu. It had rampant social connections, even more audacious, vicious, and unscrupulous in choosing targets than the other 2, specializing in seeking out pretty-looking children. If they were from a wealthy family, they would place importance on extorting money from them. If there was no money to fish up, simply selling them to brothels to be trained up would still be a huge amount of income. Ding Yumu had considerable good publicity on the streets for being righteous, where the South Side gang could be more underhanded than the other 2 precisely because of his personal conduct. Even so, the majority of the gang's businesses were run by its second-in-command, Deng Shuke. The man had a black heart and violent hands that many lives had fallen to, but due to him being willing to pay evil unto evil, he had opened a lot of key connections, causing each bureau to turn a blind eye to him. On top of that, the children the gang kidnapped would sometimes get sent into the palace, taken in by people therein, then sent further in as eunuchs after their body was purified. The gang's vast abilities were self-evident. This warranted talk about the few biggest origins of eunuchs. One was like Wang Zhi, where they had been a frontier citizen but because of a defeated uprising, their families were escorted to the capital, the children amongst them sent into the palace to be eunuchs. Another was like Huayan, where they had been from an official's family but were implicated because their family member committed an offense, then got sent into the palace to be a eunuch on account of their youth. Of course, there were also those that willingly castrated themselves for the sake of going into the palace and securing riches, like the infamous, corrupt Wang Zhen of the previous court. It did have to be noted that not everyone had a way of getting into the palace after such self-castration as he once had. Many got barred outside the palace gates. One of the Jinyue's yearly tasks was sending these men back to their hometowns. It was ridiculous to hear, but it was the truth. The palace was already full of eunuchs, so no one could get in just because they wanted to. Self-castration was merely the first step. The ability to get into the palace after that depended on one's own skill. Boss Lai and Luz Hilly had been unhappy with their business being snatched. They would formerly go to cause trouble for the other party, only to always return defeated. Later on, the 3 groups had reached a peaceful compromise, dividing up territories in the capital so that they could each do their own thing without encroaching upon each other, thus restoring peace at last. Prior to learning of the disappearance of Zhu Yang's daughter, Wang Zhi had been keeping an eye out, but he hadn't realized how serious things was. He had simply let Boss Lai and Luz Hilly come right to his door first, then arrested them both for interrogation, making them cry out for their parents and repeatedly beg for mercy. Both had stated themselves that they knew that since it was the first day of the Lantern Festival, the bureaus would be strictly on patrol, so they had forbidden any of their subordinates to do anything, to say nothing of the fact that they had never even seen Zhu Yang's daughter. As for the remaining Southside gang, the wardens had gone to its most frequented gambling den, only to discover that none of their members was there at all. Even after using the Western Depot to shut the den down and overturn it, nobody from the gang appeared, and all that had been captured were some minor hoodlums that knew nothing. Only then did Wang Zhi detect that something was off. Under these circumstances, the case needed to be solved as soon as possible because of the urgency. There was no time to slowly socialize with the gang. When he had seen Tang Fan taking Dong to tour the festival, he hence got the idea to find a way to get her to act as bait, hoping to directly seize the ones doing it. He hadn't expected that she would vanish, too. If he could still remain calm when he heard that Zhu Yang's daughter had gone missing, he could no longer do so upon hearing the disappearance of Dong. As was known, he had been making guarantees to Tang Fan just a moment ago, but the next moment, the girl had gone missing. How could this not make Eunuch Wang abundantly furious from this huge loss of face? Back when Tang Fan had left Xianyuan restaurant with a whirl of his sleeves, Eunuch Wang couldn't say anything. Now, his emotions had settled, and him relaying the entire process of events in a stiff tone was seen as an explanation. Tang Fan and Sui Zhou had a bit of knowledge about such despicable forces like these gangs, but they didn't know more than Wang Zhi did. As he himself was the director of the Western Depot, he had more manpower to dispatch, plus the resources of the whole depot centralized into his hands. Whatever maneuvers he ever wanted done, it would be done. Him knowing more than them was a matter of course. This difference in knowledge really had nothing to do with personal skill. After hearing this, Tang Fan asked, "Were the men that was fighting before suspicious?" Wang Zhi knew what he was asking about. He shook his head. "No, we verified it. It should have just been a random coincidence." Tang Fan went quiet. Owing to a random coincidence, Dong had gone missing. Speaking of it though, if Wang Zhi had never used her as bait, all of this could have been avoided. Finding Zhu Yang's daughter was very important, of course, but she was not someone close to him in that case. Had Dong not vanished, Tang Fan would still have concerns, but he wouldn't be as invested as he was now. However, saying anything else about this now would do no good. The matter of most importance was to get her back. Everything else could be put off for later discussion. The South Side gang has been active in the capital for 2 years. It must have other operations aside from human trafficking, right? Sui Zhou asked. Wang Zhi nodded. Right, that's what I was going to tell you all about. The South Side gang is larger than either Boss Lai or Luz Hilly, and they act more ruthlessly, making it difficult to communicate with them. I asked Dong to be a bait, thinking that I'd catch the gang members that did the kidnapping and be done with it, but didn't expect that she would disappear, too. Those that don't want to make things worse will make things worse. Sui Zhou pointed out the core of the issue. This gang can bribe inner officials of the palace to send children inside it. Their backer had to be someone of note. Will that affect our investigation? The other looked at him, expression a bit strange. It does have a bit of backing, but you shouldn't be asking me about this. You should be asking your commanding officer. Sui Zhou frowned, saying nothing. Still, even if the South Side gang has backing in the court, it shouldn't have anything to do with this case. It must be that some of their underlings are misbehaving. With such a big forest, there's bound to be all sorts of birds. Tang Fan felt like Wang Zhi's attitude was very strange and dubious. It was just like before. Since he had already found out that this was related to the South Side gang, it would have been fine for him to go for them directly, yet he had Adong be bait instead. It seemed like he only wanted to find the people responsible for the kidnapping and was not aiming at the entire gang. Combine that with the answer he just gave to Sui Zhou's question, Tang Fan surmised that this might be because the gang was in collusion with commanding officer Wan Tong, who was consort Wan's little brother. Was Wang Ji therefore not wanting to shoot at the rats out of fear that he would hit the vases? For it to be able to make the ever-lawless, fearless Wang Ji want to keep the peace, the gang's capabilities were plainly not the ordinary sort of immense. However, if the gang could send children into the palace to be eunuchs, was Wan Tong their only backer? Was Wang Ji being this careful because the gang have some other strong backer? In a split second, a lot of ideas flitted through his head. Before he had time to ponder deeper, though, he heard Wang Ji's chilly voice speak up. However, it was also likely that they had gotten overconfident because they had people in position that they were relying for them to act without restraint. Though, what they have done this time was really too much and it has already reached imperial ears. No matter what, the children had to be found as soon as possible. The two captured men had just witnessed Wang Ji expose them out. Not only were their faces deathly white but they were downright terrified. You two are Southside gang members, and you've heard what Director Wang just said, Tang Fan spoke. We are going to go hard on the chief criminals but we can be lenient with his followers. The child you just tried to abduct has been retrieved, so as long as you willingly cooperate and obediently explain where the gang is keeping the kidnapped children, you won't be charged. Not only that, you'll be rewarded. Neither said anything. He was anxious on the inside but maintained a calm look on the surface. Since you won't be charged, I can't think of any other reason for you to not be forthcoming. Do you really want to go to the Imperial Prison, or the Western Depot? If you do, all sorts of torture will be carried out on you, and you won't be allowed either survival or death. It'll be too late for you to repent, then. After he said that, Sui Zhou waved his hand in conjunction. Just take them back to the Imperial Prison for Piplay. We'll go up and keep watch again later. We'll definitely find more of their colleagues. Xueling affirmed, flashing the two his ghastly white teeth. Do you guys know what Piplay is? Let me tell you, we take a sharp knife to your ribs, then strum them like the strings of a pipa. You won't die but the knife will still grind back and forth, scraping your flesh off with it until the very end, until there's nothing left but bone, and then it'll grind against that. That sound, tisk tisk. Even my teeth hurt from hearing it. With such a description of torture, there was no need for them to experience Piplay for themselves, as they had immediately crumbled, talking while bawling. Sir, it's not that we refuse to talk but that it's the biggest rule of the gang. If the second in command learned that we have talked, we would probably get skinned and then die all the same. Is Deng Shuke responsible for the human trafficking your gang does? Tang Fan asked. One among them was sniveling. Yes, that's always been his domain. I heard that a bunch of higher goods had been abducted tonight but our status in the gang isn't high enough. We don't know much. You don't have to worry about any retaliation, he answered warmly. How about this, after this case is done, the authorities will help arrange new identities for you, then give you ample funds for shelter so that you can start over again in the south. That would let you live your days in peace. Xueling made a move like he was going to take them away. Why bother with them, Master Tang? Even if they don't want to talk now. Once they undergo Piplay, they'll be willing to say everything. With this hard and soft approach, the two finally and totally surrendered. We'll talk. We'll talk. We'll explain everything. Despite having human trafficking as their business, the Southside gang didn't sell salt illegally like Boss Lai and Luz Hilly. They instead ran brothels and gambling dens, and also set up money-lending businesses. In other words, they couldn't get any more wicked. Selling people was not exactly illegal. For example, disasters happened all over the place in the Great Ming, and when the citizens could no longer survive, them selling their children was quite normal. It also happened to be the source of slaves for many higher households. However, as was stated earlier, these human traffickers would sometimes either kidnap ordinary people's children for high profits, or extort a high price from rich families, or sell those with good looks to affluent places in the south, like those prostitution areas in Yangzhou. Just take a look at the previous worth of Huanyi Tower's former top prostitute, Feng Qingzi. It wasn't hard to imagine the immense profits she had to have accrued. With the South Side Gang's method of kidnapping people and owning brothels at the same time, there was then no need to trade off to someone else. They could simply groom those pitiful, innocent children into a source of wealth. Such practices were utterly unacceptable, but despite how strongly they were banned in every dynasty, there was no way to permanently cure it and could only judge whether the circumstances were grave or not. On the basis of the information supplied by the two captured men, Tang Fan's group looked for a brothel. End chapter.